Welcome to Playing with Inference, a podcast about the intersection of generative AI and games. Today, we're talking about how AI can be used to accelerate game development.
Yes, joining us today, we have Irena Pereira, who, because startups are so easy, is running two of them. She is running both Unleashed Games and Infinite Realms, has a long background in games, actually, starting from World of Warcraft all the way back in Vanilla and Burning Crusade, has since worked on a number of games, also in the mobile space, from Game of Thrones Conquest to Monopoly Go, and has decided to figure out how we're going to make games with this new technology. In particular, bringing literary worlds to life and improving the productivity of our teams while making sure all of us still have jobs to make games, if I understand that right. So welcome, Irena.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. For those that don't know you or your teams, I know that you were actually at a bunch of events. So we were at GamesBeat together, but I'd had some friends that went to the live service game or live services thing in Austin a while ago, and they were like, you need to talk to Irena. And yes. And then did you go to New York Tech Week as well? Were you?
No, but it was at the Live Service Game Summit in Austin where I was invited to speak and I was going to help close out the conference, but I was supposed to be the second to last talk, but the closing keynote, I don't think he actually showed up or was able to make it. So I inadvertently ended up being the keynote, which no pressure. I've
Right.
never done a keynote before, but yet here we were. And I had worked leveraging AI, mind you, like for a week or so on this talk. And I wanted there to be a key takeaway of the audience being inspired as to how AI could be used to force multiply each individual developer on a game team. And like one of my favorite things was I had a slide of like Rosie from the Jetsons folding laundry, because we want AI to be folding our laundry, not, doing our work for us. And that was my core premise: is how do we use AI to be able to bring games back into possibility? Games like World of Warcraft, which now people say MMOs are too expensive, we can't develop those, all of that crap. Like I actually want to play more MMOs and nobody wants to fund them, but maybe with AI, they're more within reach. So the feedback was really positive. And in fact, somebody said it was the most inspiring talk that they'd ever heard about AI, which I was like, good job, Irena. Mostly good job, OpenAI, for helping me out with getting a really great breakdown. But also, that was really the point, because AI is really a game changer. And if we stop letting the bean counters cut jobs because they think AI can push button, make game, which, by the way, it can't, and I don't think it ever will, I think we can get to a happy place.
Wait, so what is the breakdown? I've heard about this most inspiring talk that I am very, very curious. And since I'm occupied with this, I can't go into YouTube and look for it.
Oh, yeah, I don't think actually it's on YouTube. I don't think they recorded it. They might have taken a few photos, but literally it was, how I kind of came up with Infinite Realms and our approach there, in that, when I was a kid, I read a lot of books, like a lot of books. Now I'm an adult and I run two businesses and have three kids, and who has time to read? At the same time, when I was younger, I had notebooks full of like world building. Like I'd finish a series and I'd keep writing the series after it was over, because I fell in love with those characters, those locations, the magic systems, mostly the dragons. Now you'd think that more of those book series would be developed and turned into games, but now we deal with things like, oh, is there an audience for it? Will it sell? We don't make games for people who are not straight white men from 18 to 35, right? Our development green light window is a lot narrower. And now I think with AI, we're actually at an inflection point to where these smaller products and these potential products or stories with potentially smaller reach can reach larger because AI enables it, and could do so at a much lower cost with smaller teams. So that's actually what we're trying to prove with Infinite Realms. But yeah, I just want to play the worlds that I fell in love with when I was a kid.
So wait, so this is a little bit on the spirit of, I remember going to a Netflix presentation way back when, where they would say, oh, because we have this recommendation system, we can really satisfy very niche titles. Is this something along those lines? Like you can create a realm that is very, in principle, would be too small to be greenlit in a big studio, but because you can actually produce it, you just go for it.
We're proving this right now with an author that is on the Unleashed team. We just conveniently have a published author that works with us. And so she's our first partner. She's uploaded her first 5 books of her series into our AI, and we're using that to develop a text-based adventure on her world and trying to figure out how fast we can get something to market, right? Or how fast we can get something playable and, more importantly, fun. And that's the model that we want to take and then apply to the book series that were New York Times bestsellers 20, 30 years ago. My initial target is female authors in particular, because the George R. R. Martins and the Robert Jordans of the world will all get developed. But the equivalent female authors that sold just as many books with readerships of anywhere from like 3 to 7 million book sales in the past, they'll just kind of get forgotten to time. So I'm going to stand up for the ladies and see if we can actually bring modern audiences to these amazing properties.
That's fantastic. I want to make sure that I'm not getting confused at all between Unleashed Realms and Infinite Realms, and like which one's doing what. And yeah, could you just make sure? Yeah.
Unleashed Realms, and I think it's Unleashed Games.
Oh wait, is it Unleashed Games and Infinite Realms? There.
Well,
see?
I mean, those are your keywords, right? So
Yes.
Unleashed Games, that was my first startup. It was founded in 2023 with some former co-workers of mine who helped me make World of Warcraft back in the early days. And they are a game company. We make games with Unleashed, and we built a cross-platform, cross-play prototype of essentially like World of Warcraft in your pocket, but in our own IP, our own world. We've been developing a family-friendly cooperative RPG intended for parents to play with their kids. Because I'm an RPG gamer, I'm an MMO gamer, but the closest RPG I can play co-op on a console is Diablo, and I think I'd get sent to CPS.
Right.
I mean,
no,
I
had this. So,
that.
My son is 15 now, but when he was younger and kind of like wanting to graduate out of either Lego games or Minecraft, what he really wanted was like an open world. He played a lot of racing games at the time too, right? Like, and what he really wanted was like an open world racing game where he could drive around but also interact with the world and have that kind of interactivity, particularly with Minecraft. Well, unfortunately, the only game that came close to that level of interaction is Grand Theft Auto, which was not appropriate for my, under 10-year-old. But there really wasn't. Like there is a space almost. I mean, I'm sure there are numerous Roblox games that kind of like try, right, in various ways. But there wasn't a space at the time for a multiplayer game where I could play it with my son at the time that met that sort of, modern, still creative multiplayer environment. Not a good game available.
And that's what we identified was, for the first time in history, we have a whole generation of parents who grew up as gamers. I grew up playing it. It's my favorite game, EverQuest and World of Warcraft. And everything is too hardcore, or it's too dark, or it's too adult. It's targeting those Gen X and millennial players that keep getting older. And so a majority of the content we develop ends up targeting them. But now we have kids that are growing up, and all I want to do is hit a dungeon with my kids because that would be so much fun.
Right.
And so we built Haven. We crafted this very vague, hand-wavy IP of the world has been shattered by chaotic magic. And it's up to humanity to fight back the forces of shadow to bring reality back together again. And there's village building. So it's got some of that Minecraft cooperative creative aspect, except that village building then is built into your progression. So as your village levels up, everybody levels up, because I want to accommodate for the mom that's too busy to play, but she can be bumped up in level because the whole village is level 15. So Her firepower is really great.
Kids are carrying mom again,
Kids are carrying mom, but you know what? She's a damn fine fire mage. But if you really wanted to get into a more shadow light mage mix, you'd have to play a lot more. So your play time really dictates the amount of configurability that you have for your class. Like all of these things that we took into account for the different personas of the kids who are time rich, the parents who are time poor, and really all they want is every Thursday night on family game night, they're all picking up a controller and toss me a heal. Come on. I'm going to die. Those moments are some of the best moments in my gaming history. And I think we'd be a better family for it. But there's no game that really accommodates for that. And also, we started thinking about AI, very core to our content delivery strategy of how do we build a game so the content delivery is super, super thin, but AI comes in and creates the variability. So it's the same zone, but every time it spins out, it's very different.
Yeah. So, all right, start with families that raid together, stay together, and then come into. So I'm assuming when you started Unleashed Games, generative AI, was it part of the initial assumption, or was it a solution that you found along the way?
Generative AI was less it. And for Unleashed, and this was actually part of my talk, was I wanted the entire room at the Live Service Game Summit to agree that procedural gen is in fact AI. Like we've been using it for 30 plus years. And this is old hat to us game devs. And it's legit AI. And we need to not think of it as the redheaded stepchild, but incorporate it into our flow.
Yeah, it's interesting when I'm in different audiences, and GamesBeat was a good example of this. When I'm talking to game audiences, game developers, I have to be very specific around when I say AI, because we have been using things that we call AI for a very long time. And to be honest, I still will often really use more the term machine learning for a lot of what we do today for generative AI to make it even more clear. But you're right. In fact, GMT, some of the prototypes and things we've used heavily leverage procedural generation and combine that with some of the newer machine learning techniques.
Yeah, that's exactly it, right? And I think, and I love what you guys built with Retail Mage.
Oh, thanks.
Because I mean, of any game called Retail Mage, come on, man, that's awesome. But legitimately, you proved a use case of how to use AI to drive game dev and game experience as well, and where that line falls. How did you solve some of those issues without falling into the Gen AI trap?
One of the trick that we had right away, actually, and I need to finish some articles or GDC talks or something about this, but there were a couple of tricks. One of them might sound simple, is that we always worked in engine from the very, very beginning. So we actually built out our kind of prompt engineering and model testing framework in engine. And there's a few videos online where folks can see some of this, and we probably should release more. And one of the reasons we did that was we wanted to ground everything in what could we represent in engine and not get ahead of ourselves thinking just because I got Claude or ChatGPT or Llama or whatever model to come back with a result that, I've achieved, the gameplay that I want. So I say that, I know it doesn't completely answer your question, but it's one of the first things that I usually bring up, is because I think that practice was one of the reasons we did discover some of the things we found along the way. And so then the next part was then, since we now have these two things hooked up, and there's a lot that kind of goes into that, but nevertheless, we just started experimenting, to be honest. Like early on, we had this idea of, we're going to kind of do this from an engineering perspective, like breadth first search. Like we're not going to say like, okay, AI dialogue, let's solve AI dialogue, right? Like it's like, well, we have a bunch of different ideas. And there were many that we thought, this is never going to work. This is just silly. Like obviously cannot work. And we try it and something happens and we're like, oh, well, maybe we were wrong. And vice versa, right? So like, I want to say that, we were very insightful and had this master plan at the beginning, but nope, we were just the simplest, stupidest thing of just, what are all the things we can do? Let's start trying them. And eventually you figure things out.
And it's awesome Because, as we've been building out Infinite Realms and trying to get a sense of what is AI in games, what does AI in games look like today? And we look at Hidden Door
Yep.
and, Retail Mage, AI Dungeon, Infinity Worlds also is another one. There's a handful of these AI native game experiences. And one of the things that I really like, Retail Mage aside, don't include them in what I'm about to say, in what
It's
you
all
built
right.
in that. But I feel like a lot of these experiences, no knock to them, were not built by game developer first teams, right? They were built by AI technologists building out what they think game developers or game players want. And you even see that with in-world and a lot of these dialogue and NPC driving technologies. And they think that people want to have endless conversations with NPCs, or they want agents in their game that live in a world that make the world active. But what happens in those cases is, one, nobody actually will, that's a toy if they are just talking to an NPC forever. So that's not going to have longevity or have the retention rates that a game would. And then if you get AI agents, the AI agents don't want to bother with humans. Like, humans are too slow.
I have stories on that one, but go ahead. Ramon, did you have something you're going to jump in there on?
No, continue.
So one of our
humans
tests,
are annoying.
I've shared this story on the podcast before. One of our tests, we had a little murder mystery scenario. A lot of people try this kind of thing out, right? And so we have this little murder mystery scenario, and there are people looking for suspects. And so you go and so you have players in the game and they're doing player things, right? And we have a perception system, right? So we do in games, right? This is not a new thing. You can ask record what it's part of Unreal, even has a built-in kind of system. And so you would ask the AI characters afterwards things like, who's suspicious? And they would pick the humans. They would always pick the humans because the humans are acting weird, because the humans jump into the game and bunny hop around and jump on top of the tables and go
Super
around,
sus.
right? Just like they would, because you're in a game and you're fooling around and you're parkouring all over top of things and seeing what you can break. And all the AI characters are like, that person's on drugs. Something's wrong with them. They're very sus. Right? All the AI characters are like that. The humans are acting like the players are weird, right? Sometimes.
So was it clear who was a player and who was an AI?
No, it wasn't. It was not clear to them. And in fact, we've specifically done things like ignore when they jump around a lot, basically. Ignore these very human behaviors that do not make sense when you're trying to say, hey, AI character, play it straight. You're not in a video game. You're in this murder mystery, right? Because you want to ground them in the fiction, right? So that they play. But then humans are playing games inside this world, so they just seem weird.
AI agents are not multi-threaded.
Yeah, they perceive things differently, right? If you're asking a model, hey, what's odd about this situation? Well, usually it's the humans that are the ones acting weird.
Legit.
The first game I built was Zaranova. It was a social deception game, and part of the key idea here was that if you try to make a who is the murder type of game, it's easy for the humans to collaborate or make something silly or outrageous statements and immediately reveal to each other who is human and who is not. Because I wanted to see, okay, you have to guess who is an AI. But if you do the reverse, if the AIs have to guess who is human, then the incentives for the humans is to behave more robotic. So the entire premise was, it's you and there's a bunch of AI agents and you have to guess, the AI agents have to guess who's human and you have to make them give you some secret code. They did come up every now and then with silly things that are obvious in hindsight. Okay, give me the hash for this string. Okay, yes, I'm going to fail that.
It's like a reverse Turing test.
Yeah, exactly.
And prove that you're a computer.
Exactly.
Oh my gosh, I was just thinking of a new game. Let's build it right now. What does Werewolf look like, where we have to figure out who the human is?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That was the spirit. But
yeah, I think there's a number of math problems that if we did not have calculators on hands, we would be in trouble very quickly.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it would be a very short game. Oh yeah. No.
The other thing is, it makes sense in a turn-based. Maybe if it's turn-based, you can, they ask a calculator question and you can answer on your own time. But if it's real time, it goes out the window immediately.
Well, and so that's the line that we've been trying to tread or define more with Infinite Realms. And there's actually a strategic split between the two companies. We talked about like Unleash Games, they make games. And Infinite Realms is an AI company. Their job is to take the text. Hold on, I'm going to get a visual.
Ooh.
Their job is to take like a PDF of a book like this, right?
Okay.
And then ingest it. And then what do you do with it? Right? That's the challenge, is that this can't turn into a game immediately, but there's phenomenal aspects of a game in here. There's a whole magic system. There are these sun runners that can summon fire, and they travel on sunlight to communicate. There are dragons that you telepathically connect to, that you can bond with, and there's intrigue and characters that are incredibly compelling, beautiful locations across various biomes. How do you turn that into a game? And there's something very unique about how we're approaching it, which is like looking at it from the perspective of a game developer. What do you do in pre-production when you are ordered to make a game based on an IP, which I have a lot of experience with? Like, how do you distill that IP into something that then an environment artist can say, okay, I know exactly what I need to build? And how do we shortcut that process? Because one of the things that I've been running into as I talk to people about AI is that they're scared of it. They're scared that AI is going to steal their job. And
Right.
I don't think any of us want to live in a world where humans aren't crafting games. The point of us being in this business is to make games and to express ourselves as craftspeople. And if AI is building the worlds for us, then what are we here for? So Infinite Realms, like its entire purpose is how do we distill semantic content, leveraging AI to shortcut the process, the pre-production process, so that a game team, a much smaller game team, can hit the ground running from day one and start like building out a game in engine and creating scenarios and crafting a fun experience and focusing on the fun rather than sitting in a meeting room with an author or a team at Warner Brothers, getting judgment and approvals in order to be able to like lay the next model of a rock onto terrain.
So I have a lot of questions, but first I wanted to clarify what I understood from Infinite Realms. You're taking all the materials you can get your hands on from a specific IP, and then you're distilling that into a set of artifacts that the game development team can use to build a game out of. Is that correct?
Yes, and we're also training bespoke, what we're calling walled garden LLMs, so that you can have a conversation with an AI that's been trained on the content, but it's context limited, so that you can't talk to the Melanie Ron LLM and ask it about lightsabers because it just won't know, and it can't break context.
So, okay, many questions opened. I have a question of what are the artifacts that we're talking about? Because you distilled content into sort of artifacts. One of these is this walled garden LLM. And then on garden LLM, how do you even ensure you have like actual walls versus soft walls? As in like, it's not likely that they'll talk about, but you may get it every now and then versus they will never know about lightsabers.
Well, it's actually in the architecture of how we use the human brain as inspiration. We have the processing brain, which can be a generally trained inference engine, like OpenAI. But then we have the context window, which is the context of the book series and the world. So it can only define its outputs based on the context, but it can reason what the next statistically appropriate word or decision is based on its general processing, but it won't output anything from that inference engine.
Interesting. So you're putting some sort of post-processing filter based on the context. I don't know how into the details you yourself get into, but does this look like, and ignore the question if it's not the case.
Some of this is experimental and in our head that we think that we can do.
Okay.
And then there are other things that are actually very concrete. I was showing this off at GDC where we had ingested Winnie the Pooh into our experimental engine, and we broke it down into a production Bible, a series of locations and art briefs so that we could hand that off to a third-party developer, one like an art team at Devoted, and say, hey, make concept art or objects. Then we took that and distilled it even more to a series of 3D models that would be necessary, animations, sound effects, textures. And then we could then compare it against our team size and know how many hours and estimation of how much time it would take to make each one of these elements, and then compare it against the cost of that particular developer so that we could get costing and know how much Winnie the Pooh would actually cost to make with all of the different disciplines, but with just one push of a button.
Joke just a bit here that the only job we're really replacing is all the producers, which I think like most of like all the artists and developers are like, actually, wait a second, there are some jobs we can lose here. No, joking. All my producer friends, I love you.
Producers don't even want to do that work. The producers want to facilitate the meetings. They want to get people into a room and like get people. A lot of that.
This is not necessarily to your point. Like there is a lot of work. We talk about this, and there's a bunch of areas where we're always using tools that increase our productivity, and we can do a lot more. Putting generative AI aside, we're always looking for ways where it's like, hey, we automated this one thing that used to take a lot of time. Now it doesn't, so we can make a bigger and better game or make a game faster. So I want to understand a little, like, is that the primary thing that you guys are focusing on? Is there also, are you generating content that's used in the game itself as well too, or is it kind of this pre-production sort of work?
We're starting with the pre-production work because that's what's contextually relevant for where we are with partnering with Unleashed. We've literally hired Unleashed, and it's like an entire game dev team of about 7 people. And we're like, hey, can you make a game in 2 months with the tools that we're providing? And as you make that game, identify for us places where you'd want AI to expand out the flexibility of the experience. So like essentially giving them a task of make a retail mage based on this particular IP. How are we using the AI to shortcut the team's onboarding to the IP without forcing them to have to read a really long book? Because again, nobody has time to read, especially if they're only getting 8 weeks to make a game. And then also inform us, because that's the secondary piece. And when we fundraise again in the fall, we'll be raising to build that really dynamic gameplay engine based on the IP, but we're separating it out, based on our roadmap.
So is Unleashed right now part working on Haven, the MMO, and then part working on the Infinite Realms type of games that are coming through the pipeline?
Well, Haven's technically unfunded, sadly, because nobody's investing in content right now. I don't know if you've heard.
I've heard some rumors.
Yes.
We can't have games anymore. All we can have is tools. Why do you think I had to make a whole tools company?
Yes.
I'm sad. But, the team that I've literally brought on to help us build this game experience was the volunteer team that was coming in fractionally to like help me push out a couple of content changes for Haven. And I actually stream every week as, my deep need to still build community and potentially fundraise. Unleashed now actually has a job, and I can actually pay people, which is like my favorite thing to do, by the way, is pay people for the work that they're doing. It's amazing how hard that is these days. But Infinite Realms did get a pre-seed to be able to prove out at least this pre-production capability and to get us to the next fundraise, which will help us raise a seed in the fall. That's the plan, at least.
I hope I'm not changing subject here a little too much, Ramon, if you want to go back, but I want to go talk a bit about, because you're in the game industry, I'm in the game industry, I have a history in this, and you are building tools to have improved the productivity. And we joked a little there about, the producers and, enhancing them. Let's call it that way.
I, for one,
what's the
welcome
response
our
you do get,
overlords.
right? Like, so game tools is tough too, right? Like game studios are not always easy customers. What reception are you getting from folks when you talk to them? about using these type of tools? Like, are you getting curiosity, a lot of pushback? Like, is it a range? What are you seeing as the kind of response as you start to talk to people, to the degree you're allowed to talk about it, I suppose?
Let me jostle my memory and come up with some of these quotes of things that I've heard. One was, "Holy shit, can I buy that?"
Good.
Two was, "Wait, I have 12 teams that could use this." Or, "Wait, what do you mean? I could just give you all of our game design docs and you could speed up our live ops content delivery?" Wait, what? We could deliver content faster to players and shortcut the time from ideation to release? Like all of these things. And actually, I've now had 4 or 5 people, and I haven't talked to a bunch of people about this, to be fair, but all of these folks want this tool for their team to be able to process and deliver their content faster, shortcut their development timelines, whether or not it's for a book. The same technology still applies to an entire Google Drive of game design docs. Right.
Right. You know, it's interesting because going also to the point of your existing familiarity with the game development process, you're right that a lot of folks anticipate a day when we will be able to press a button and get a game. But there are problems in game development that those of us deal with
Nobody
day in
wants
and
that.
day out. And it sounds a little more like you're trying to say, all right, what's some pain that we can solve right now? I mean, is that
Yep.
fair? Is that a fair way to?
That is exactly it. So to kind of rewind a little bit, there was a period of time just before the pandemic when I was stuck out here on the East Coast and all game dev was happening on the West Coast, and I could not relocate. This was after 38 Studios. I worked on Kingdoms of Amalur. We went bankrupt. We were offered a job actually by Tom Cadwell, my husband and I, because we both worked at 38. He said, "Come, you want my ex-husband to build what eventually became Legends of Runeterra," because he was a card game designer. And
I
they
worked
wanted
on
me
that
to come out
project.
and work on oh my goodness, we
Yeah.
should talk more.
Yeah.
They wanted me to come out and work on the UI for League, and my ex-husband said no. So we were in Rhode Island. This is where we are now. This is where I still am. I needed work when we were getting divorced, and the reality was is that there was no game dev here. 38 Studios imploded the entire
That's right.
industry.
Yep.
Harmonix left. There were all sorts of consequences to the death of 38 Studios that have long persisted here on the East Coast. So I spent some time working for the United States Air Force.
Interesting.
I joined. This is our challenge coin. It's called a Kessel Run, which is an experimental.
I was going to say, that looks like a Millennium Falcon.
It sure is, my friend. It sure is. I joined an experimental software factory, as we became known. And our job was digital transformation of national security. I worked as part of this unit, and I was flown to Korea, to Germany. I almost got to go to Al Udeid in Qatar. Did not make it all the way there. Thank God. I heard it was really miserable living in trailers and like hole in the ground toilets. So I dodged a bullet. But my job was to go and interview airmen as they were managing what's called the ATO, the Air Tasking Orders, which was a catalog that's printed every single day of all the missions that any plane is flying for anywhere in the Department of Defense, whether it's Air Force, Army, Navy, Marines, including helicopters. Any mission is managed by this joint air tasking order, and it was done by hand. And it's not very efficient. And we built an app where the job was setting up, calculating out fuel tankers, how much fuel they needed to be able to go and refuel planes in the air, how many stops they could go on, and then have enough gas to be able to get back to refuel, to turn around and go again. And this was a job that took 16 hours on a whiteboard. It was literally done manually for a majority of air operations in the Middle East. And once we incorporated our process, we did some user interviews. We got a really great contextual understanding of what their process looked like from moment to moment. We built an app in about a week that then turned around and turned that process into 45 minutes, still hand done in a web app, and saved the United States Air Force $150 million a month in fuel.
Wow.
Like, insane. And that was iteration one. But then we added AI to it. And then it started doing AI calculations. So then in our first pass with AI, it was 9 minutes. Second pass with AI brought it down to 45 seconds, to the point of where humans were going in and optimizing the decision making of the computer and then doubling the amount of savings. But the savings didn't matter dollar wise, because again, the DoD just like, they have their money that's appropriated. They just want to spend it, but they want to spend it more efficiently.
Mm-hmm.
They wanted more turns. They wanted the planes to go out and refuel more often. And that was just one app. Then we took over mission planning. Then we took over fixing the software on the F-35. We took over managing repair cycles at Air Force bases. But the one key piece was going out and talking to those airmen and having conversations with them, understanding their workflow and finding their pain points and building software to solve it. And that's what Infinite Realms is for games. How do we use AI to shorten the distance from concept to execution, but do so in a way that's respectful of the game developer in the first place?
So one of the things so Infinite Realms is trying to, from what I understand, speed up the process of these game studios want to have for shipping the games. And in parallel, one of the things that keep popping up is this idea that you can deliver more with smaller teams. It's not the exact same thing. One is about giving the same team be faster, and the other one is giving a smaller team deliver the same level of quality that you would have before. But I think they're related, right? I think there's been quite a bit of excitement of now is a perfect time to be an indie because you can be much more agile. It's also have all of these great tools for development and speed up. What do you think, in your experience, what are the areas where generative AI actually helps in that production process? And where do you think is actually fake help? Because, and here where fake help, what I mean is it's not uncommon where you say, oh, I got, this asset that supposedly it's good for, and then you spend more time fixing it than you actually would have been just buying it from someone.
That's exactly it, right? Is you don't want GenAI building your assets, because then you spend more time fixing it, erasing fingers, or, in the case of UI, which is my bread and butter, vectorizing it or making it transparent. I have to do just as much work. And in fact, I have to repaint it from the very beginning anyway. Where we find that AI actually does a lot of the heavy lifting is in the communication between different disciplines. When an engineer has an idea that can influence the execution on the art side, they can generate something and say, hey, this is what I was thinking. And they can change the way the artist thinks about what they were working on. It's not in the nebulous realm of, hey, I have this idea that then your brain is going to interpret. It's actually a more accurate collaboration tool. So as an example, this just happened last week on our team. We're building a text adventure based on this world, written by Jen Lyons. We're trying to figure out, how do we make it a really cool, immersive experience, but ultimately you'd have it be text under the hood. What does that look like? So me with my AI brain, okay, I go to Midjourney and I render out an image. I grab a prompt out of our AI system and generate a scene. And I don't even check it with the author, but I later checked it. She's like, there's no place that looks like that in our game or in her world. So it generated something completely incorrect. But then I took that piece and then I took it to OpenAI and I said, knowing what you know, because I've trained OpenAI to be my co-collaborator and my pair on the business of Infinite Realms. I said, knowing what you know, please come up with a few concepts of what a text-based experience could look like with this background image, and make it feel like this classic RPG, make it more visual, make it a more visual text-based RPG experience. And through some massaging and back and forth, I was able to generate an image of what the UI could look like, where I could literally just start lifting out button textures, sure, or repaint them, because now I don't have to think about them. I don't have to design them. I'm still necessary to be able to do that work and to optimize and make it even better. But what I've done is I've gone to the team and now I have this image where I can say, this is what I'm thinking. What
That's
do you think?
actually, that mirrors a lot what we did recently. We've been working on this demo and we wanted to do a small video that we can show people. And we had an idea of what would happen in the video. I can't draw to save my life if a stick figure is the extent of my artistic capabilities. But we had the idea of what should happen. And if I see a scene or a drawing, I could tell you, okay, that doesn't make sense, and what, or remove that tree or whatever, because, I can see it, I can interpret the drawing. I just can't.
You still have taste.
Exactly. There is some taste, right? I hope. So what I did is I actually created a storyboard of every 5 seconds and this was a lot of back and forth with the image generation from OpenAI, going back and forth for every 5 seconds what I'm imagining, or what we had imagining as a team that there should be in the video. And then we went with that storyboard and then we talked to tech artists. This is what we have in mind. Yes, the style may not be the most consistent, but it's like in that direction. And now we have, as you said, I think you pointed very well, like more accurate collaboration. I think that helped at least me a lot be able to communicate with the artists.
AI can be directive. Never make it prescriptive. But you can certainly, as an artist, if I'm putting my artist hat on and I have no idea how to program a shader, but I want to experiment with something, I can go to AI, go into Cursor and say, hey, write me a shader that does this. No, change it a little bit this way. And I don't ever have to bother an engineer who might be more, better served helping continue to make the UI more cross-platform compatible, which they're also using Cursor to speed up their process. But then I can take that code and show it to the engineer and say, hey, this is what I'm thinking. Is this the right way to do this? Or what would you do differently? And that's a very different conversation than, I have to wait for another person to be available and have the cycles to be able to just even start experimenting and iterating with me. And we have to set up a meeting and then get into the same room. Like, there's so much friction to my harebrained ideas that I would not get to iterate as quickly as I possibly could. AI is now a development pair that can fill in any gap and give me feedback and tell me, no, that's a shitty idea, if that's what I want it to do, without bothering somebody who might be time limited.
Yeah, and by the time you bother the time limited person, you come up with a more polished, more concrete idea that then you can actually,
and it's good.
Yeah, you get actually to deal in the details where he can actually, or she could actually provide the actual value that he
it's a jumping off point. It's like another lily pad. They're like, oh yeah, and plus and, or
yes.
What is it? What is the improv term? It's yes and. Always like you want to get into a yes and moment. Whereas typically in game dev, when somebody outside of your discipline has an idea, it's usually, well, there's this wrong with it. Or that would take too much to build.
Right. Right. I do agree. Like, we've used it for storyboarding as well. Often we do not use generative AI in Retail Mage art, generative AI art in Retail Mage, but internally we have it to use, particularly storyboarding an idea. Like, we have a particular concept. It can be faster. One thing I have sometimes found is that even a lot of the current systems, if I do give a rough sketch or layout of something, most of the, whether it's ChatGPT or many of the other types of AI systems, can use that as an input so that I get a little closer to what I want coming out of it. But then it'll be a lot more refined when I express it to the rest of the team, because it's fascinating. And I think, Irena, you'll appreciate this, that in game development, actually maybe this is part of the point here, is when we develop games, they're very rough in the beginning, right? You've got gray boxes sometimes, you've got very, very early things. And even those of us who make games, will claim sometimes that they can see past it. Let me play test this early thing. Have you ever had that where you've got an early build and you're afraid to share it, and everyone's like, don't worry, I can see past the gray box. And then you actually show it to them and you can tell they're immediately, everything gets caught up on the visuals because it's such a visual artistic experience. And I do think that sometimes just a little bit of this rapid iteration, even if it's just going to be throwaway work, can help people visualize what it is that the actual vision that you have before you've had the art team come in and be able to get you further.
Well, have you noticed that on game teams, when you come up with an idea or share an idea, and I often say to my teams, ideas are valuable as this piece of paper that do never be married to your idea. But if you spend, the more time you invest in an idea expressing it, the more married to it you become and you're invested. Like that is your baby. And if you've had to spend a week coming up with a concept just to show it to the team and then to get it shot down, that hurts your heart a little bit.
That's a good point.
But secondarily, we as humans are actually instinctively primed to find things wrong at all times. Right? We will gravitate to the thing that sticks out like a sore thumb before we comment on anything that is good. So when you bring your precious idea that you've spent all week prototyping and concepting, and then, an engineer says, but what about this edge case? And then another engineer says, what about this edge case?
I've never done that to any of my collaborators ever, I'm sure.
I love the idea of like, not only is it fast for prototyping, but that you get to throw an idea there without fully invested. And then to your point about we are prone to criticizing, this all rhymes a lot with the joke of like the fastest way to get information online is to state it out loud, but wrong. And someone will come, oh, you're wrong because of this.
Oh yeah. And that's 100% true. So if we can come up with something that feels more fully formed so that people grok it faster. Pardon the use of the term. I used to love that word, and now
there is a hardware company, okay? So we can.
There's more than one grok.
There's more than one. But in order to be able to get the team to grok it and say, "Oh, I get it," and once you get there, then the human brain switches into creativity mode and says, "Yes, and." But if you get it there in a half-formed, half-baked mode, people are going to gravitate to the flaws. It's all human psychology at work.
Yeah. One of the things that I am very excited about, so I don't think, I'm sort of bearish on the idea of like these models as world models that do everything for you, and then it's like a game in a model. But I'm very excited about the idea of real-time style transfer so that I can gray box a game and then for prototypes, just splatter in a real-time rendering that is just like, I want a cartoon-like or a toon shading, and I don't have to do the actual thing. I just want to get the vibe so that, to Aaron's point, like the people who are playtesting, they can actually not get bothered by the gray boxes. And it's fine if it's disposable. Like we don't have to use it during the game. But for getting across that playtesting early on, it really helps. It will really help.
Can I tell you something that we did at Unleashed early on? And this was the experiment that I did that completely changed my mind about AI and shifted my thinking. So we had this piece of concept art, and our art style that we came to was an expression of a blend of different artists that we had loved, that we'd always wanted to express in a game that we thought was a new and fresh angle for game art style. We wanted it hand-drawn and animated, looking like you were stepping into an 80s cartoon, and with hints of Miyazaki, but also a bit of The Last Unicorn and Saturday Morning, He-Man and She-Ra. How do we get all those vibes together into one package? And we got this amazing Star Wars-like image of characters that our art team had put together. But me being who I am, I'm like, well, I can't just say that this is our art style. I have to go and we have to test it. And so one of the tricks that we did over at Scopely was we would do these concept tests, and they would cost like $150K to $300K depending But I worked with the customer insights team to build out a test where we'd take art piece and then express it in multiple art styles from realistic to cartoony, and then we'd put it in front of people and survey them and ask them what they thought about it. And I went and I priced it out with Newzoo, and like it was $75K. You know, when you're a tiny little pre-seed team, there's no way you can afford that. Yeah. When like you could get 4 engineers for that amount of money. I mean, still engineers are expensive. And that was just for one market. If you wanted to do all the markets, it was like $150K. So it's like, screw this. I'm going to find a faster way to do it. I took it into GenAI and I said, here's this art piece. Now express it blended with the style of Fortnite. Now blend it with the style of Skyrim. Now blend it with the style of Roblox. Blend it with the style of Minecraft. Blend it with this Amano, this really cool illustrative watercolor painter. I have another friend of mine, Stephanie Law. Blend it with the style of Stephanie Law. AI Midjourney in particular knows all of these artists. Yeah. And even though it's not perfect, it still got it into a slightly like a shifted view.
Yes.
And then we picked a gradient of images and we put that in front of users, and we found this tool called Pollfish, where for $2 per user we could put it in front of somebody and we would survey. So for $1,000 and a week at Midjourney with me fiddling around, we were actually able to test a range of art styles and then map that to different demographics and know which demo group responded to what art style and which one was more broadly appealing. And what turned out was that our art style was more broadly appealing, but if you ask just men, they liked the more Skyrim execution. If you ask women, they actually liked the Fortnite version. So like we got insight into our potential audience that we would have never been able to afford otherwise, just because we were willing to just screw around with GenAI, put it out there, and nobody's ever going to see these images other than maybe I'll do a GDC talk someday and talk about the process.
So what is this? You know, we've talked a lot about how this helps us reduce pain, speed things up. I agree. There is a lot of pain in developing a game. Nah. What does this say about, what's your vision here for the way the future works? Because like on the one hand, it does mean a smaller studio like indies arguably get, if they adopt these tools, could get superpowers, so to speak, that they can do the kind of stuff that a AAA or larger existing studio would always do these type of tests. And a smaller studio just could never afford, didn't have the time or resources. So we have that. But I would imagine that some of the pushback is like, the devil advocate position is that like, well, you know, Newzoo or artists, like we're going to do that work. So like, how do you advocate for the type of industry that we're creating that still includes all the creatives and people when we may not need to run those tests in the same way, right? Like we're like, well, we don't need that service anymore.
Nobody wants to do that art though.
Nobody wants to do that art anyway.
I mean, here's the reality is that by enabling small and letting them punch above their weight class, what we're doing is we're actually increasing the appetite for risk. And that's what the industry needs right now.
Yeah.
Because we are so narrow focused that we will only develop proven IPs. Yeah. We will only develop the sequel. We're stuck in the Hollywood sequelitis problem. The same thing that, you know, now we're suffering how many Marvel movies? I mean, I love them. And, you know, Star Wars television shows. Pedro Pascal has filled our television screens because he's the one that tests the best with audiences, right? Mind you, I love me some Pedro Pascal. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah, he's fantastic.
Legit, like one of the best actors of our time. But what we don't get is adaptations of really cool books like this written by female authors because it won't test well. Because she only sold 5 million books. But with our process, and if we can develop a game experience that's super teeny tiny for just a couple $100,000, we can test it with audiences, see how it resonates with modern audiences. Then maybe we can have data to justify why this needs a $5 million budget instead, or a $10 million budget. And what I think we're actually at is we're on the precipice. We're not there yet. We're on the precipice of a game development renaissance where smaller teams can build riskier products because the market has a lot more room. And mind you, I think one of the things that we're struggling with is market glut. There's way too much content out there. But the problem is that there's always been way too much content. Anytime anybody could pick up a guitar, you could have music, and still you can find hits on Spotify. And we'll find better ways to curate the content. That I'm not worried about. And in fact, AI is going to make that process a lot easier. But I think we can make better products for more niche audiences, and they don't have to appeal to hundreds of millions of people the same way World of Warcraft did, because again, we can build it. We don't have to spend $110 million to build a game like that. We can spend 10.
I also think that, to your point, you can take bigger risks, and then you can really double down on the area that you are best at. So people tend to see, oh, they're not going to hire artists, but I can totally see artists now, spending a lot less effort or dollars on software engineers, and they instead make a game that is very artistic, where the key selling point is really engaging and beautiful art, and use all the tools to fill in the more engineering part. It goes both ways, right? And if you are an engineer, you can really double down on it's a systems heavy, and maybe your art is more iffy, but you can double down on that areas where you are the expert versus trying to, like you said, trying to satisfy the mega market and be very in the median.
And we can have more shots on goal.
Yes.
And we can get more products, like you're saying, like another Okami or another Balatro, or remember Braid, like how mind-blowing, or even Portal, right? Yeah. We wouldn't have titles and breakout hits like that if it weren't for having an appetite for risk. And currently, the appetite for risk was limited to the publishers that were willing to take those risks. But I hate saying this, everybody in the tool space says that they're democratizing access to game development. But I'm also a photographer. And I went to college and learned how to develop my own film and worked in a dark room and did all of that stuff. And it was actually so cost prohibitive that I couldn't pursue a career in that. So I became a game developer instead. Actually working on World of Warcraft, my lead server engineer, Brian Wing, who is our CTO at Infinite Realms, he handed me his digital camera and said, here, go play. And suddenly I could take 500 photos and they could all be crap, but I could find the 3 that were amazing. And all I needed were those 3. And then I was off to the races. I suddenly could take as many photos as I wanted. And now we all have phones in our pocket, right? Yeah. And these are cameras that we can take photographs anywhere. But the simple democratization of access to the tools does not necessarily mean that the quality of the output is worthy of a Pulitzer Prize or a high dollar sell. You still have to have the skill. You still have to have the taste. And you have to have the capability. Those 3 things need to exist in order for it to be a worthwhile product of your creativity. So it doesn't matter that more people can have access to different disciplines. I think it's actually only going to make the resulting products better.
Completely agree.
People shouldn't be afraid of AI, man.
Lean in for it. That's the message?
That is the message, because you can be so much cooler than you are. You get superpowers.
Do you think, okay, so I think we're getting close to the finish, but now they make the wheels spin. I feel like there's a lot of currents converging. On the one hand, you have this sort of implosion on the AAA studios. You have suddenly tools that make indie development much more attractive. And there was another one that is escaping my head, but I wonder, and then we've oversaturated with specific IP, like everything is Marvel, everything is Star Wars. But as
that's about it. That's all we get.
The extent of our media availability is, obviously I'm putting it easy for you here, but is it like a great time to build an indie studio with new IP, or are we really going to see a renaissance, or is there reasons why we don't have more IP out there beyond just it's hard to process smaller, more niche novels?
Well, I think game developers need to learn the skills of product market fit and learning how to test with their audience. And this is one of the core problems that I've been struggling with my entire damn career, which is if you have an idea, freaking validate it. Validate it with an audience before you invest in it. And AI actually helps us do that. And you can typically, there was no validation or business intelligence in game development products. And we were driving on WoW. It was who could yell the loudest or who had the highest level game designer position. If you were anything but a game designer, nobody listened to you. So your ideas weren't worthwhile. So as an artist, if you had an idea for a dungeon or a game design, we didn't hear you. Now we live in a world where that line of demarcation can be made with, hey, put it out in front of an audience, get people playing it, test it, get it out there faster. And then the iteration cycle involves the player. And that's all I've been fighting for anyway, is finding a way to get it into players' hands sooner, bigger, faster, so that you can continue to iterate with the player as your partner, even if that player is you, but you're always building working software. Lots of game devs don't ever touch their game or play their game. They don't eat their own dog food, which is, I think, was part of the death of the industry and why we spent $60 million on certain AAA studio spinoffs that never released anything in the 5 years that they've been operating. And they're still burning through cash and now raising again. Why? Because they thought that they had the right taste and that they could just build in a black hole. And they've ruined it for the rest of us.
Well, I do agree that when we think about what you're implying on the impact that these tools have to our industry. So one of them, like by speeding up, lowering the pain, everything else, right? We get more efficient. We can make indie studios more powerful, ideally. But what that really means, to your point, is that the relationship between a studio and a player can change. And we've made this case before at Jam&T that this is one of the impacts that this technology has, is that anytime we've been able to reduce that feedback cycle, everything you said, like we think of evolution of the industry, one of the things that we've seen is the feedback cycle from player to developer has been collapsing. So it used to be I had to in your background, you got a bunch of boxes there that's where there were discs that were printed, right? Like it took a lot of work to get a cartridge or a disc out. And the feedback cycle of did that hit the market? Did players like it? Can I change it? It was very challenging and very slow. And then we get to digital distribution, we get to new editions or DLCs, and we have then live service games where we can update much more frequently. To your point, I think some of this means that feedback cycle, how quickly can I take player feedback and change my game and follow on with them, changes the relationship between studios and their customers, game developers and their customers. And every time we've closed that loop, we've made better games, we change the type of industry, we create new type of business models that we may not even thought of. And I think that at minimum, this technology will have that sort of impact in the industry. The example I used to give earlier was just as much of if you think of other mediums where we have a lower content cost. Earlier, was it this year, last year, with the diss tracks we have diss tracks between artists. You can't do video games as a diss track, right? It takes too long for me to go back and forth with Ramon here about as we use video games as this medium to reply and respond to each other. But we do it on TikTok now, right? It used to be video would have never been possible. Audio, okay, video, but now we have TikTok and we can go back and forth. So what happens when games have that level that I can now go back and forth and participate in an audience, and I'm using games as that communication medium because we've gotten so quick at our ability to update and change and respond, so that if players see something they love, we can follow on with that, not in the next release, but in the next day, in the next hour. What does that even mean as this medium? We're not there yet, but you can kind of see how quickly we can start now responding that unlock our ability to connect with audiences in different ways, connect with players in different ways. So I'm amongst all the other things that the technology may or may not impact game development, I do think it will have at minimum this effect for us.
Legitimately. Like, this is our opportunity right now. I like to say that we're shortening the distance between game developer and player.
Yes.
And that should be our goal. It has always been our goal. And by doing so, it allows us, like you said, to be more responsive and to, in the long run, build better, more resonant products.
I'm excited for that future.
I think this is a good, we can leave it with that. Irena, if people want to find more about you, about Infinite Realms, Unleash Games, or anything else you want to shout out, where can they find that?
Well, you can't really find out much about Infinite Realms beyond this podcast. I think this is the most I've ever talked about this particular business. But you can find out more about us at Unleash Games at unleashgames.com. And if you want to learn about Haven, we could use your support. Find us at haven.unleashedgames.com to learn a little bit more about the game. And then we stream every Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific. We live stream our game. We bring on guests. Hey, Aaron, Ramon, like, I'd love to get you guys.
That sounds great.
Yeah.
Come play my game and come, let's take down Cobblemot together, and you can give me feedback on our gameplay.
Sign me
But we're on YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitch, all of those likely places.
Fantastic.
All right.
Well, Irena, thank you so much for coming. Thank you, everybody, and we'll talk again soon.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to the full episode. We really hope you enjoyed the discussion. It would help us out a ton if you subscribed to the show on your platform of choice, as well as shared it with folks you think would find it useful. You can always check out playingwithinference.com to get in contact with us, join our Discord, or just find the links to the episodes. See you next week.